The shouting came first. Then came the silence, the kind that presses against your chest, making your heartbeat sound louder than the world around you. Every shopper in the mall froze, their conversations cut short, their heads turning toward the jewelry counter where the commotion had started. Under the bright fluorescent lights, a trembling young girl sat in her wheelchair, her pale cheeks streaked with tears that caught the light like broken glass. Her breath came out in shaky gasps, her fingers gripping the armrest as if holding on for dear life. Standing over her was the store manager, a man whose anger seemed to fill the entire store. "You can't just roll in here and take whatever you like," he barked, his voice booming across the polished floors. In his hand, he held up a small silver bracelet like it was evidence in a courtroom. The crowd murmured, phones lifted, lenses capturing what looked like guilt. The girl tried to speak, her voice trembling. "I didn't steal it," she whispered, so softly that only those closest could hear. "I swear." But in a world that rushes to judge before it listens, her words were swallowed by whispers and side glances. People had already decided she was guilty. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and standing up for what's right, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Vibes. Your support helps keep stories of hope and humanity alive, stories that remind the world that compassion still matters. Among the onlookers stood Ethan Ward, a single father in his mid-30s. His face carried the quiet exhaustion of a man who had learned to live with struggle, deep lines beneath his eyes, rough hands, a look that spoke of bills paid late and dreams postponed for the sake of his daughter. He had come to the mall that day with 10-year-old Maya, clutching a small envelope of savings they had built together over months to buy her a modest birthday gift. Ethan knew the value of every dollar, what it cost to choose between a small joy and a meal on the table. But when his gaze fell on the trembling girl being humiliated before strangers, something deep inside him shifted. He saw not a thief, but a child, scared, cornered, and alone. The store manager, Mr. Lewis, was relentless. He towered over her, his finger jabbing toward her face, his tone sharp with authority. "You think you can play innocent? The bracelet was found in your lap," he accused. The girl, her voice barely steady, tried to explain that she had accidentally brushed the jewelry off the counter while reaching for her wallet. But no one cared to hear her side. Judgment had already drowned out her truth. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. Maya tugged at his sleeve and whispered, "Daddy," she looked scared. He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the scene. When Mr. Lewis' voice rose again, harsh and cutting, something inside Ethan broke. He stepped forward through the crowd, his footsteps echoing on the tile. The store fell silent as he stood beside the girl's wheelchair. His voice came out calm but firm, each word cutting through the tension like a blade. "That's enough," he said. The manager spun around, eyes narrowing. "And who exactly are you?" he snapped. Ethan took a deep breath. "Someone who still remembers what compassion looks like." The murmurs began again. People shifted uncomfortably. Ethan knelt beside the girl, seeing up close the trembling in her hands, the way she avoided eye contact, ashamed of something she hadn't even done. "It's okay," he whispered softly. "You don't have to be afraid." Her eyes widened, the first sign of relief in the storm that surrounded her. Ethan stood and turned toward Mr. Lewis. "If you think she stole something, call the police," he said. "But stop treating her like she's less than human." The words landed heavy in the air. The manager's face flushed red, torn between pride and guilt. Still muttering under his breath about shoplifters and sympathy, he gestured for mall security. Two guards appeared, uncertain of what to do. Ethan didn't flinch. "Check the footage," he demanded. "If you're going to accuse her, then do it with facts, not assumptions." Around them, whispers began to change tone. The same people who had recorded now lowered their phones. Some began to realize what they had done, how easily they had joined the chorus of judgment. Minutes passed before one of the guards returned from the back office, holding a small tablet. He whispered something to Mr. Lewis, whose face drained of color. The footage showed everything, the girl's elbow brushing the bracelet off the counter, it falling quietly into her lap. No theft, no crime, just an accident. The silence that followed was louder than the shouting had been. Shame rippled through the onlookers like a wave. A few people lowered their heads, others slipped away, embarrassed. Mr. Lewis stammered, trying to apologize, but the words felt empty. The damage had been done. The girl's tears continued to fall, not from guilt, but from disbelief that someone had finally stood up for her. Ethan knelt once more, his voice gentle. "Are you okay?" She nodded faintly, whispering through shaky breaths, "Thank you. Nobody ever defends me." Ethan smiled softly, the corners of his eyes creasing. "Then it's about time someone did." Maya, who had been holding her father's hand tightly, offered the girl a small tissue. "You can sit with us, if you want," she said with innocent kindness. Together, they wheeled her outside the store, away from the glares and murmurs, to a quiet bench near the mall's central fountain. The sound of cascading water filled the space between them. The girl introduced herself as Clara Jennings. 17 years old, paralyzed from the waist down after a car accident 2 years ago. Her mother had passed away last winter, and since then, she had been living in a small shelter while trying to finish high school. Every word she spoke carried the weight of loneliness and loss. Ethan listened silently, his heart twisting with empathy. He knew what it was like to struggle unseen, to smile for a child while hiding the pain of 1,000 worries. As Clara spoke, Maya leaned against her father's arm, watching her with wide, kind eyes. "You're really brave," Maya said softly. Clara smiled weakly. "I don't feel brave," she replied. "Most days, I just try to make it through." What none of them knew was that across the mall, a man in an expensive tailored suit was searching desperately, his face pale with worry. His name was Martin Jennings, Clara's estranged father. A self-made millionaire who had built a life of luxury but lost his family in the process. After Clara's accident and her mother's death, grief had swallowed him whole. He had tried to reach his daughter, but guilt and pride had kept him away too long. Now, regret was his only companion. For months, he had hired private investigators, searched hospitals and shelters, always arriving too late. Until today, he had been only a few stores away when he heard the shouting. By the time he pushed through the crowd, it was over. And now, as he finally saw Clara sitting outside with Ethan and Maya, he froze. He approached slowly, heart pounding in his chest. When Clara turned her head and saw him, her breath caught. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Martin knelt beside her wheelchair, his voice trembling. "Clara, it's me." The girl's eyes filled with tears instantly. "Dad," she whispered, barely believing it. Ethan stepped back quietly, realizing the depth of what was unfolding before him. Martin took her hands in his, tears streaming freely down his face. "I've been looking for you for months," he said. "I'm so sorry, Clara. For everything." Clara's lip quivered, the emotions too heavy to contain. She leaned forward, letting him hold her, the father who had once been a stranger to her pain. When Martin looked up, his eyes met Ethan's. "You defended her," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. You reminded me what kind of man I used to want to be." Ethan shook his head softly. "Anyone would have done it." But Martin's eyes glistened. "No," he replied, "not everyone does what's right when no one's watching." As the sun began to set beyond the mall's glass ceiling, the noise faded into a distant hum. The store that had once echoed with accusation now stood silent. A girl who had been humiliated an hour earlier now sat between two people who had given her back something precious, hope. Clara turned to Ethan and said softly, "You didn't just defend me. You reminded my father who I was." Ethan smiled, eyes glistening. "Then maybe today wasn't an accident," he said quietly. "Maybe it was meant to happen." If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Vibes. Stories like this remind us that compassion still exists, that even in a world quick to judge, one act of courage can change everything. Before we end, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you saw that girl being accused? As Ethan and Maya walked toward the exit, her small hand wrapped around his, he looked back one last time. Clara sat beside her father, both smiling through tears, two lives mended by a moment of kindness. The fountain's gentle rhythm played in the background, a lullaby for forgiveness and new beginnings. And as they disappeared into the soft glow of the evening, it felt as if the world had paused, just long enough for goodness to breathe again. Somewhere between apology and redemption, between strangers and family, kindness had once again rewritten fate.